bread, we use matzah bread because it's unleavened, it's clean, it's kosher. And are we on? Oh, okay. Thank you. For those of you at home, welcome. We're glad you're giving some attention and spending some time with us this Easter. I know there's a lot of family planning going on for the Easter season, but thank you for joining us, and we look forward to a time when you can physically, socially be back with us and intermingle. Fellowship is highly regarded in the Bible as very important to the spirit of an individual believer. This is where we're going this morning. Look at him, look at him. That song was saying, look at him. And it falls right in line with where I'm going this morning, and that's the four crosses of the four Gospels. If you sit down and start reading through the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, there are four crosses that grab your attention. Three of those crosses have to do with the execution of Jesus and the two thieves that were executed next to him, and that's why you see on the back of cars, you'll see on bumper stickers, you'll see what's called the eternal fish, which became a popular symbol of the Christian faith immediately in the first century, or you'll see three crosses on a hill, and which also the cross became a popular symbol immediately because of the mysterious supernatural story of what occurred on the cross. But there's four as you read through the Gospels, and we're going to spend our time this morning in the book of Luke. Luke was a Gentile. He was Greek. He's the only Greek writer in the New Testament. He was a physician, a doctor, and he gives attention to aspects of the life of Jesus and often uses medical terms, but we'll probably stay in the book of Luke, written by Dr. Luke himself, and we're going to give quick attention to the four crosses that typically, even for a casual reader, these crosses grab your attention. And it's part of the Easter story. Now, we're celebrating Easter Sunday. Historically, the fact is that this whole situation with the Lord having his Last Supper, his execution, his death, his burial, his resurrection, all happened during the Passover season. But in about the 13th century or 12th century, Pope Gregory changed the Gentile calendar purposely so that Easter would never fall simultaneously on Passover, because the Roman religion of centuries ago did a lot to create traditions, rituals, and calendars that were tried to detach Christ from his Jewish roots. And here's the crosses we're going to visit real quick. There's the cross of unbelief. We'll get to the verses in a few minutes. There's the cross of Christ, he himself. There is the cross of belief, came from one of the thieves. The cross of unbelief came from another thief. And then the cross of burden that's found also in the book of Luke. Now, all these crosses surface in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But I just chose to park this morning in Luke, and we'll start with part of the story of the death, burial, and resurrection. And it's Luke 23, and I'm going to read the verses to you. And it's out of the Authorized Version Bible. And there were also two other malefactors. Now in Matthew, Mark, or John, they use the word criminal. In another of the gospel, they use the word thief. And they were also two other malefactors led with him to be put to death. Now this is after the mock trials and the religious elite of that day trying to figure out how to get Jesus out of the picture. He was rocking the boat politically, socially, morally, spiritually, and they decided, well, we'll bring him before Rome's civil court, accuse him of criminal offenses, and let them sentence him to death. And you know the basic story. Pilate tried to release him because Pilate said there's no fault in this guy. He's done nothing wrong. There's no sin in this man. But he was forced into it, and so Christ was judged, and as a matter of fact, in one of the private sessions recorded historically in one of the Gospels, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, some of the Pharisees on the council said, well, but, okay, we execute him, but what are we going to do with Lazarus? Lazarus was dead for over 3 days. Thousands in the Jerusalem region knew it. Lazarus, Mary, and Mary Magdalene, they were popular because they, what can I say? Lazarus and his sisters ran in today's terms, it would be a homeless shelter. On top of Mount Olives, behind the Garden of Gethsemane, and Linda and I have been there. They actually ran a care center, a homeless center. People, so they were well known by the populace. And the Pharisees said, okay, we're going to kill Jesus. We'll execute him. But some of the other Pharisees said, but what are we going to do with Lazarus? He was dead for over 3 days. Hundreds of people, close to 3,000, had gathered around Lazarus' tomb when Christ approached it and watched him resurrect Lazarus. What are we going to do with that? And some other Pharisees said, well, after we execute Christ, we'll execute him again. And that was their solution to thousands witnessing the resurrection of Lazarus. So, here we go with the historical record. Led him to be put to death, him who, Christ. And when they were come to the place which is called Calvary, in another gospel it's called Golgotha, they crucified him who, Christ, and the malefactors, that's the thieves, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Now he was saying that in reference to the soldiers who were carrying out his execution. Jesus was saying, Father in heaven, these are soldiers that are following orders. Forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they've gotten involved in. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. Cast lots. They gambled over the clothes of Christ after they got him hung on the cross. and of course Zechariah and prophesied that this would happen. People, Gentile soldiers would gamble for his clothes. And Zechariah, Malachi, the book of Daniel, Isaiah, Abraham in Genesis, they prophesied numerous different aspects that came to pass during this period. They parted his raiment and they gambled, cast lots over his clothes. And the people stood beholding, and the rulers also. Now it's talking about the religious rulers, the religious elite, derided him, cursed, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he be Christ, the chosen of God." They were being sarcastic and railing against him. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming to him and offering him vinegar. It's what they did when they crucified people, gall and vinegar, to help deaden some of the pain. And saying, if thou be the king of the Jews, save thyself. And a subscription that Pilate had inscribed was written over him. That's what they would do. They would put a plaque over the head of the criminal, and stating what he did. Probably the thieves had a plaque over their head that just simply said thievery or thief. But over the head of Christ, Pilate had this inscription, and written over him in letters of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, "This is the King of the Jews." And the scribes and Pharisees didn't like that, because when it was written in Greek and Latin and Hebrew, it created an acrostic that spelled out Yahweh. And the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin immediately spotted Yahweh spelled out in an acrostic, and that's why they pleaded with Pilate to change the sign over his head. And Pilate said, "What's been written has been written," and he refused to change it. And and one of the malefactors, one of the thieves, which were hanged, railed on him. Railed on who? Railed on Christ, saying, "If thou be Christ, save thyself and us." And so, railed. This is the cross of unbelief. This is the cross of unbelief, the cross of scorn. In one part of the Bible, he scorned him, he cursed him, he reviled him, he blasphemed at Christ. And the cross of unbelief. Now the Roman soldiers, Jesus said to them, you saw it, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do." But there's a lot of unbelief in the world today. And not just like the Roman soldiers. There are many people who move through life in unbelief, but they don't harbor a scorn for Christ. And then there's a lot of people who harbor scorn. The communist culture scorns Christ and Christianity. The socialist culture scorns the leftist culture, the globalist culture, especially in the circle of leadership. They scorn Christ. We have currently today we're dealing with the current administration openly scorning Christian charities, Christian organizations, Christian schools, and so there's many different cultures around the world that are not only doesn't only move through life in unbelief, but they scorn Christ. They harbor anger toward Him, toward the Christian faith around the world. And also, people in pain will often become very angry. This thief, no doubt, was in great pain. He was being executed by crucifixion, something that the Persians developed. And the Roman Empire took it as a use of capital punishment. It was only used for capital punishment offenses. But people often in pain would become very angry, would curse. I was reading on social media a couple of weeks ago the last words of famous people. And here's a perfect illustration. It is said that when Betty Davis was dying, she was in great pain. And some of her friends approached her about God. And she said, "Don't talk to me about God. Don't talk to me about heaven. Don't talk to me about prayers. I don't want you praying for me, and I don't want you talking to me about God." Boom. A couple of days later, she died. She harbored a bitterness, obviously. And this thief was very self-driven. And he was like, "If you're the Christ, you saved others, save yourself, and me too." And so that's the cross of unbelief. And then we come to the cross of Christ. Let me tell you an interesting historical curiosity. Caesar Titus, who was the Caesar during the ministry of Christ, had a dream, according to Roman historical records. Had a dream about the prophesied Hebrew Messiah showing up in the Jerusalem region. So, what became one of the most famous Roman historians, Tacitus, and his son Tacitus II, was called to Caesar's presence, and he said, "I want you to go to the Jerusalem region. I want you to find this Messiah. I've had a dream, and I want you to follow him. Everywhere he goes, I want it recorded in the historical record, everything that he does." And so Tacitus and his son set out for the Jerusalem region and found him. After sponsoring actually a religious conference, and Christ was invited to attend it, and that's where he healed the man in front of thousands of people. About 22,000 attended, according to Tacitus's record and his son's historical record. They were there, and they followed Jesus all over the place. And almost everything they record, it falls in line with what you read in the historical record in the four Gospels. There was a third historian. He was Jewish, but he was not religious at all. Very secular. And Rome paid him, because he lived in Jerusalem, to keep a record of what the ministry of Jesus, and his name was Josephus. So what's interesting is the records of Tacitus concerning the execution of Jesus, and Josephus and his Tacitus' son fall right in line with what you read in the historical records in your New Testament in the four Gospels. And as a matter of fact, when Tacitus realized they were going to crucify and execute the Lord, he sent a writer all the way back to Caesar, and the writer, returning from Rome back to Jerusalem, had a pardon from Caesar for Jesus, and he got back to Jerusalem a day late. It already happened, and so there's the cross of the unbeliever, and there's the cross of Christ, and the cross of Christ, Hannah. There it is, the cross of redemption, the cross of salvation, the cross of sacrifice. He was sacrificing himself in behalf of us and for our sins. The cross of transformation, the cross of forgiveness. And that cross got a hold of me many years ago, and it transformed my life. Now I grew up religious. You've heard my story. Grew up in a Methodist church. My mama sang in the choir. My daddy was on the board. He was a youth teacher of youth. And when I was smaller, we did the sevenfold amens. Amen. All that stuff. And while they would sing, we would have to dress in our white dresses and go down to the altar and light the candles. And I was doing that from the time I was 7 or 8 years old. And then walk back to the back of the auditorium. And then at the end of the service, they sang the sevenfold holy, holy, holy stuff. Holy, holy, holy. And I had to put the white dress back on and come down and put the candles out. And so I grew up in religion, but I didn't have a relationship with God. Not anything personal or intimate. I was married, had a family. Linda and I had Douglas. I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and before I experienced in a very personal way and intimate way the cross of Christ. And he redeemed me and my marriage. He's not just spiritually. He salvaged my marriage, literally, and salvaged my life and my children's lives, and now my grandchildren. And so the resurrection of Christ, the cross of Christ, and then the resurrection of Christ, same. Resurrection of salvation, the resurrection of redemption. Tacitus has got it in his records, just like Luke, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John have. Tacitus too has it in his records, and Josephus has it in his records. They saw the risen Christ ministering after his death and burial. 3 days and 3 nights. And there's over 2,000 religions in the world. You can just name them. Some of the more ancient ones, like Buddhism and Hinduism, all of them have had their original leadership. And but fortunately for us, you can go to Jerusalem and the tomb's empty. I've been in it. Amen. I've been inside. It's empty. And it's been empty since the resurrection of Christ, of salvation, of redemption. Here we go. Luke 24. Now on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came into the sepulchre, the tomb, bringing spices which they had prepared, and certain others with them. They had a culture a ritual in the Jewish culture to take a dead body and embalm it, so to speak. That's what we would call it today. And which they had prepared certain others with them, and they found the stone rolled away from the sepulchre. Wait a minute. The stone had been rolled in front of his tomb. It was the actual tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, and which was the most wealthy individual in that region. And had been sealed with the Roman seal, and 12 to 20 guards had been appointed to guard the tomb, because the religious elite didn't want the followers of Christ to steal him from the tomb. And, they found the stone rolled away from the sepulchre. Verse 3, and they entered in and found not the body of the Lord Jesus. It came to pass, as they were much perplexed, confused, behold, two men stood by them in shining garments. And the other Gospels identify the two men in shining white garments as angels. Angels have the power to step from one dimension into the physical dimension. They have that ability. And as they were afraid and bowed down their faces, so they bowed before the angels to the earth, they said, who? The angels, the men in white shining garment, why seek ye the living among the dead? He's not here, but is risen. Remember how he spake unto you when he was yet in Galilee? He told you this already when he did Bible studies from the ancient prophets, that he had to be executed and sacrificed for our future, saying, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day rise again. So they were confused, and the angel says, why are you being confused? He told you this was going to happen. And thank goodness it did. The cross of belief. The cross of belief. There's another thief. Being crucified, executed, capital punishment. So there's this other thief. Listen to his response. Luke 23, verse 40. But the other answering, this is the other thief, the other criminal on the other side of Jesus, dying, being executed, rebuked him. Rebuked who? He rebuked the thief who had been cursing Christ. Don't you fear God? Dost not thou fear God? Seeing thou art in the same condemnation? And we, he says, indeed, justly, for we receive the due reward of our deeds. But this man hath done nothing wrong. Shut up over there cursing Christ. He said, we're getting what we deserve. This guy's done nothing wrong. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou come into thy kingdom. And Jesus said unto him, verily I say unto thee, today shalt thou be with me in paradise. He realized, I'm getting what I deserve, but this Messiah, Christ, he's without sin. He's done nothing wrong. He doesn't deserve. And he says to the other thief who's cursing the Lord, Don't you have any fear of God? Dude, we're dying. We deserve what we're getting. And he called upon the Lord. Lord, could you remember me when you enter into your kingdom? And the Lord said, today you're going to be with me in my kingdom. Wait a minute. He didn't take communion. Today you're going to be with me in paradise. Wait a minute. He didn't take the Lord's Supper. Today you're going to be with me in paradise. Wait a minute. This guy didn't get baptized. Today you're going to be with me in paradise. Wait a minute. This guy didn't wear a white shirt and tie and go to church. Today, you're going to be with me in paradise. Wait a minute. This guy was a thief and a robber. He didn't go to a Bible study. Today, you're going to be with me in paradise. Wait a minute. He couldn't be religious or fulfill any rules and regulations and rituals religiously. Today, you're going to be with me in paradise. Wait a minute. Nobody explained to him the Romans road. Nobody explained that to him. Today, you're going to be with me in paradise. Nobody even explained to him John 3:16. Can you whip that up real quick for me, Hannah? She had to leave the outline. Nobody explained this to him. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever, that means anybody, any color, any race, whosoever believeth in him, him who? Christ, the begotten Son, should not perish, but have everlasting life. Nobody took the time to explain that to the thief on the cross. That's probably the most famous verse of Christianity and has been for centuries around the world, and typically one of the most recognizable or the most recognizable verses that you see. Tim Tebow got in a lot of trouble with the NFL because he would put it on his face going into games. He would put John 3:16, and they tried to, and the different teams, a great athlete, and now he's got a great charitable organization worldwide. Great athlete, but the NFL, he refused. They confronted him about putting Bible verses on his eyes, and he said, I'm not going to do that. That's my personal body. If I want to put John 3:16 on my face, I'm going to put it on my face. For God so loved the world. The world? Yeah. Whole world. That he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. That thief didn't get any of that explained to him. And Jesus said, today, you're going to be with me in my kingdom. The cross of belief. What happened? Pastor Gene, what happened? I'll tell you what happened. Christ sees our mind and our hearts. And he saw what was going on in the heart of that thief and responded. Because what was going on in the heart of that thief was genuine, authentic expression of faith. But the Lord saw his mind, saw his heart, his spirit, and but he didn't do anything religious, and he was a thief. It's one of the coolest stories in the Bible. Today you're going to be with me in paradise. I've been with people who were dying, and families have called me over the years, and I've showed up, and they've please talk to my dad about God and about Christ, or please talk to my mom. She's not expected to make it, and on several occasions I've shared with them, used this because of the brevity of time. Didn't know when they were going to pass or expire. I would often use John 3:16, and on occasions they would say to me, but I haven't been baptized. Or they'll say, I haven't done this religious thing or that religious thing, and I have to tell them about the thief on the cross. He couldn't get off that cross and do anything except call out to the Lord with a certain degree of belief. And the Lord said, you're going to be with me today in a place called heaven. Quit fretting. Wow. The cross of burden is the last one. The cross of burden found in Luke chapter 9. And he said, who said? Christ said, to them all, if any man will come after me or follow me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. I don't know what your cross might be. My cross is different than your cross. I remember 4 years ago, someone asked Emily, how long has your father been sick? And Emily said, I've never known my dad not to be sick my whole childhood. That's her cross. Marie's not here today. Marie usually sits right here. Right there. She's our financial secretary. And she hardly never misses a service. But when she does, she's also a caregiver for her mom, and usually complications have arisen. And Daniel and I, about 4 years ago, we drove out to Carolina Memorial Gardens. This was before Linda's mama passed away. We went out to Carolina Memorial Gardens and spent some time at my daddy's grave, at my mama's grave, and my older son's grave. And we walked across the street and spent some time at Linda's daddy's grave, who's buried real close to our family. And we prayed for each other and shared some memories about the family and Douglas. And got in the car and was leaving. And off in the distance on the other side of the cemetery, Daniel says, there's a lady out there on a grave. I said, yeah, I see her. And as we got closer, Daniel said, Dad, that's Marie. And I said, oh my gosh, it is. We buried Marie's husband, Glenn, in that general area. And I told Daniel, I said, you know, that's the general area where we buried Glenn, her husband of 25 years. You remember Glenn. He helped work in the social center and do the electrical work. And even when he had cancer and he was diagnosed as terminal, he'd show up and work in the kitchen over there in the social building, the family center. And as we got closer, Daniel said, Dad, that's Marie. And I said, yes, it is. And I pulled over, and we got out of the car, and there Marie was by herself with a few items, sitting on a blanket, sitting on her husband's grave. That's her cross. I don't know what your cross is. Jesus made it very clear, in the world you'll have tribulation and heartache, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. He said, even in the midst of tragedy and trials and reversals, stay optimistic and stay close to me. I don't know what your cross of burden is. It's probably different than mine, I'm sure. But all of us carry one. And that's the four crosses of the four Gospels. Okay, Lord, I'm finished.